Okay, first one is the event tree, and I gave you two different solutions. The first one, I believe, so the first one was the bar solution, I think. Yeah, this is the top, the first one is the bar solution. The second one is what I believe is a more correct solution, because it assumes that the success is 1 minus the failure, and here the success is 1 minus the failure. With small numbers like this, that doesn't make much of a difference. Okay, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't have a huge impact on the result. So it doesn't really matter. However, if you did have probabilities of failure that were like 0.1, 0.2, something like that, that would make a substantial difference. So therefore, I don't like Barr's method, to be honest with you, but I presented it just so that you could see both of them. And if I were doing this, this is the way I do it, because I think that a success or failure is success has to be 1 minus the failure. That's the only logical way to do it. So, and then the hazard risk index, it just came from the table that I gave you in class. And there's nothing profound about that. It's just a demonstration of the way to take the probability and translate it into something, some action, some criterion to take care of. Questions on that? So I don't think there's anything too profound about it, but it's something worth thinking about. Okay. Well, then let's take a look at the investment decision matrix and go back to the, it was a choice to, it was an investment decision based on stock prices and whether to invest or not to invest. This is using Maximin and the expected value. Maximin, of course, is which one is the least regret, which one is the least painful possible outcome. Well, that's to not to invest, because there you end up with no gain, no loss. Whereas you have a potential loss by investing at $300,000. So, just looking at that, you wouldn't invest. However, if we look at the probabilities, that even if you only have a 20% probability of increasing your value of the investment, the potential gain is so great that that would still induce you to invest. And as that increases, as that probability increases, the expected value should increase appropriately. I'll do this. So if it increases to 0.4, so then it just gets better. So even when you have very high potential gain, and you have and you put probability to it, it has a tendency to force your decision into action, regardless of how bad you can lose, the potential for losing. Questions on that?
So decisions are contrast to each other. So
yes.
Who would make final decision? Which one we should prefer?
That depends a great deal on your tolerance. This doesn't take into account your risk tolerance. If it were me, and I saw that, I'd be almost certain that this was going to happen. Okay, because I'm really tight, and I wouldn't want to lose anything. But some investment houses Some people have a great risk tolerance, but investment houses seem to me have a big risk tolerance, and some investors have a very large risk tolerance, so they go for that. This doesn't incorporate that risk tolerance the way the trees do, the decision trees. That's why I like decision trees better, actually. You would have to use a qualitative risk tolerance to evaluate this.
Do you mean when you say decision trees, are you referring to the event trees, or?
No, the decision, these.
Okay.
Yeah. Because those are the ones that have the risk tolerance calculations built into them. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Then we have a decision matrix for looking at maximum, and these are just arbitrary alternatives and events. Like maximum, typically maximum and expected value don't agree with each other, which I think is interesting. Here, with the maximum, the one with the least loss is option B, whereas when we incorporate the associated probabilities, the expected value is the highest for alternative D. Now, when you take -2, when you take these alternatives and you subtract from them the maximum benefit, that way then you can get this matrix for the minimax procedure, which again points you to option B, because that's the least regret, 3. That's the least loss. And whereas 5 is higher, this 5 is higher, here 6 is higher, here 5 is higher. So that leads us to B again, which is just maximum going come from the opposite direction. Except expected value, perfect information in, once again, guides us towards option D. Questions about that or comments? Again, this doesn't have any kind of built-in risk tolerance, so without knowing that, without having a qualitative idea of that, it's really difficult to say which is better of these two. It depends on how much you're willing to lose potentially, and how much you trust your data. That's another thing that this boils down to is, are these data good? And if they are, then maybe and your probabilities are really good, maybe you should trust the expected value. Otherwise, maybe you need to use another method if you don't like the data, Any other questions or comments? Okay. And then the next one, number 4, was we have 2 types of respirators with reliabilities and purchase and repair costs associated with them, and then evaluating it with by expected value for each alternative, and then given a risk tolerance of $100, what would be our expected utility? In both cases, this guides us towards B, okay, towards respirator B, because here the expected value, well, the expected value is a loss for both of them. Okay? Maybe we need another alternative, but nevertheless, it's a loss for both of them, but it's a less of a loss for respirator B. And if our risk tolerance is $100, then the expected utility is quite a bit better, even though it's still negative. Let's, just out of curiosity, decrease our risk tolerance and see if it changes anything. No, still pretty much the same decision, although the expected utilities get worse. And if our expected utility increases from 100 to 200, the same decision also. So no matter how we look at it, it looks like we have that respirator B is the best option here. I like this too because it has more of a tendency, the decision trees I think have more of a tendency to agree with each other. Not always, but they have more of a tendency to agree with each other, so you don't have to look at two different methods and say, now what am I going to do? Anybody have any questions or comments about the decision trees? Okay. All right. Now we get to Mr. Markov. I want you to do this two different ways. Once with a finite policy over 3 weeks, so 3 time periods, and then the permanent or an infinite solution to it. Okay. This is a good sales or good medium or poor, very much like the return on the fertilizing. But here the options are newspaper or radio here with this return, and newspaper advertising here with this return. Okay. And we want to see how those two media of advertising affect the sales over a 3-week period. Okay. So these are my transition and return matrices, radio and newspaper. These are the values for radio and newspaper. So newspaper is better than values. For stage 3, just as that implies, newspaper is always the better solution. So then for stage 2, once we go through the machinations of calculating radio or newspaper, so we come to the same conclusion. And stage 1, same conclusion. The point being is that this is so consistent that it propagates through all the stages. Do you need to have some review of or do we need to go through the mechanics of it? Because I know the mechanics are a little bit convoluted, let's put it that way. They're not difficult, but they're kind of convoluted. So if that would be helpful, we can talk about the mechanics a little bit.
I wouldn't say no to that.
Okay. It looks like we're getting some other head nods. So, let's go back and look at our decision analysis procedure here. Very good. And for our stage 3, because I don't have these memorized, and we have the value for, in this case, radio advertising, plus, oh wait a minute, skip ahead, stage 3. Okay, well stage 3 is simple. You just do your value matrices and choose the optimum. So we can skip stage 3. So let's go to stage 2. Okay. And stage 3 is pretty straightforward. So stage 3 is the value for, in this case, radio, the transition matrix for radio, and then the optimum matrix for stage 3, which we just looked at. Okay, so it's plus matrix times F3. Okay, so the value matrix for stage 1 for us, for radio, is 4.8, 4.5, and 4.2. Plus the transition matrix for radio, which is this guy right here, 4.5.1, 0.1.7.2, and 0.1.2.7. And then the optimum matrix from the previous stage, or the next stage, however you want to look at it, because this is 5.3, 3.1, 1.4, which comes from here. Well, ours hasn't changed because it's 5.58, 5.55, and 6. Okay, so then going through that, this is for k equal to 1. It's our k equal to 1 solution. Not use up all the board. Here, k equal 1 solution for stage 2, then down here is 10.407, 10.143, and 10.068. For k equal 2, we have the value matrix for newspaper, plus the transition matrix for newspaper, plus or times the optimum matrix from stage 3, the next stage. So the value matrix for newspaper is 5.58, 5.55, and 6. Plus the transition matrix for newspaper, which is 0.2, 0.53, and 0.7.3, and 0.2.8. And the optimum matrix from the value matrix from stage 3, which is 5.58, 5.55, 6. That ends up then for k equal 2 to be 11.271, 11.235, and 11.91. Okay. Now for stage 1, and we put those into this matrix, and you find out that for every one, option 2, which is newspaper, is always better. And so that's that state then. Now for stage 1, k equal 1, you use V1 plus transmission matrix for 1 times F2, yes, thank you. I was thinking about something else there. I thought I made a mistake over there, but I didn't. So, again, V1 is still a 4.8, 4.5, 4.2. Plus P1, which is our 0.4, 0.5.1. I'll make that small so I can fit everything there. And 0.1, 0.7.2. And 0.1, 0.2.7. And then the optimum matrix from stage 2, which is 11.271, and 11.235, and 11.91, and that turns out to be this 16.1169. 15.8736 and 15.911. So that, and that's for K equal 1. For K equal 2, the 2 plus transition matrix for 2 plus the optimum matrix from 2 is, now we've got 5.58, 5.556 plus transition matrix, which is 253, 073, and the last one is 0.2.8. And this same 11.271, 11.235, 11.91. And with that, we get 17.0247. And 16.9875. And 17.775. In each case, it looks like 2 is again the best decision. So we can kind of guess what the outcome of the infinite model is going to be from looking at this, but we don't know for sure till we get it done. Does that help? Mm-hmm. Good. You see that I was more sensitive to round-off error here than I was in vacuums yesterday. Ran into some problems with my Cavalier round-off. Significant digits. Okay, any questions or comments? Like I said, it's convoluted but not particularly difficult.
For the test, will you provide any of the matrices?
No, however, I will make them so that they're not too miserable to do.
Okay.
About that. And I'll try to at least.
It takes a long time to
Yes, I know. Always. I know. I might make them smaller. That's the other option. Okay. Then, this is our infinite decision, and surprise, surprise, it looks like it's better to advertise all the time in the newspaper rather than the radio. And like I said, that's not too much of a stretch after looking at the solution to the finite problem. Now, the questions, I didn't get a lot of questions about this, but the ones that I did had to do with the algebra, of getting from here down to here. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit, just in case that's not immediately obvious. Okay, computer array system, I got it. Okay, so let's take the top one, top equation here. We have E is equal to 4.8 plus 0.4 times F1 plus 0.5 times F2 plus 0.1 times F3 minus F1. Now the typical assumption that we make is that F3 is equal to 0. So that means that this goes away. Then what we desire is to isolate this 4.8 on one side of the equation. Okay? So that means we have to start subtracting everything else. So the first thing we have is E, and then F1. So this is 0.4 times F1 minus 1 F1. So that means it's minus 0.6. But to get it on that side of the equation, we have to add it so it becomes plus 0.6. F1. And then for the F2, nothing unusual there, we just subtract it. So that's minus 0.5 F2. That equals 4.8.
How did you get the 0.6 again?
It's 0.4 minus 1 F1. So that means minus 0.6 on this side of the equation. And then to get it to the other side of the equation, we have to add it.
Okay.
So it becomes plus 0.6. Okay. Is everybody comfortable with the algebra of that? Because then, that's how you develop your A equation. This, what I call the A matrix, I should say, have all ones of coefficients of E. Then these are the coefficients. Rather than making them this sign negative, I just did this universally plus, and then I could put the sign of each one of the coefficients here, and it would go into my equation, and that becomes the third column. And that's the one that you need to invert in order to get your solution. Now, like I said, if you do substitution, if you do Gaussian elimination, it doesn't matter to me. I just have to let it do it this way. So anyway, after you solve that for E, F1 and F2, and then since we made the assumption that F3 is 0, then again, the first step to get the matrix of this iteration, go back and look at our notes here. Is that becomes our F, which is not the E, but the F1 and F2 and 0 becomes the optimum matrix. And we use the same approach. And the same approach as F is the value of 1, which in our case here would be radio, transition matrix for radio, and then that optimum matrix that we just solved for. And that becomes this step. Then for K2, we use radio with the same optimum matrix. And for that improvement step, then we make a decision, which in our case, with radio and television, radio and newspaper, was in each case, again, newspapers. And they were greater for each, for good, fair, and poor, as they were preferable. Then if we, in this case we assumed radio only, then we would assume newspaper only for the next step. And for newspaper, we form our equations based on the value matrix for newspaper, which is here. And this was the value matrix for radio. This is the value matrix for newspaper, and this is the transition matrix for newspaper, right? And go through the algebra, solve for E, F1, F2, and 0. This becomes our F matrix. In the next policy improvement step, or the next iteration, and do that for just radio, just newspaper, and again, it looks like newspaper is optimum. We've converged because we came to the same solution twice. That's our optimal solution for long term. Questions or comments?
So if you don't come to the optimal solution the first time, what would you do after that?
In other words, you mean after your second iteration? Because
Right.
you have to do at least 2 iterations.
Right.
If you don't, after your second iteration you have not, it hasn't converged to the same solution, then you have to come up with another policy arbitrarily and do this whole thing over again. Typically, according to most operations research, that's why, first of all, that's why you have a program, because they're obviously very, very tedious. But second of all, most of these are supposed to converge within 3 or 4 iterations. They shouldn't go longer than that, according to most operations research books. And apparently that's the case, unless you have something odd going on with the data. So, next week, I'm going to finish hazard analysis today, obviously. Next week we will go over the hazard analysis homework. We'll go over the third practice problem set and any review questions which you might have. How's everybody coming along with their projects? Anybody running into any problems?
I ran into a snag with my software. They advertised, or I found cause-consequence verbiage kind of in the hoopla surrounding the software, but then it actually didn't specifically go that route.
Interesting.
It went, what do they call it? Like cause event diagrams, and it really just, it was an Ishikawa fishbone diagram. That wasn't terribly complex, and that's not what I was looking for.
So it sounds like it's a terminology problem.
I think it is.
The advertisers.
I think it was. They got me.
That's what you get when you turn things over to the marketing department.
Yep.
Caveat emptor. Okay.
My snag is more of a lack of software.
For Mort, I'm
Yeah.
not surprised. Yeah. I'm not sure when they used it that there was software.
Yeah,
Because it's-
70s. So.
Yeah, there was even software available to do that. Or that they used it for, general purposes.
Well, software back then, as overbearing as Mort is, would need house-size processors.
Yeah, and that would be hard to program with Fortran, I imagine. Anybody else? Are your projects moving along?
I've kind of stumbled out of the gate, I guess you could say. All I found the manual for third, and I found some other articles about it, but I guess I'm not really sure where to start with it.
Okay. Why don't you come and talk to me sometime about
Okay.
it? I can maybe, if you haven't already gone to the sources that I have,
Okay.
I can help you with that.
Okay.
Nobody's screaming foul on going this, it's going well for everybody else. Or at least hopefully it's going somewhere. Let's put it that way. Okay. Well, last week we did some basic symbology of fault trees. And I finished that up, and we talked about some, the last thing that I talked about was the two notation styles. What Barr calls engineering notation, I think is a little bit more compact and less obtrusive to use. So that's the reason I gave it to you, because that's the one I'm going to use, just because it's easier and more compact. And what we're doing that for is what we call a reduction of a synthetic fault tree. This is synthetic just because it's hypothetical and it's not a real case. However, if you had a fault tree that looked like this, you would do it exactly the same way. And because I've used this on real fault trees, and it does reduce them to minimum cut sets. It's actually kind of cool that it works as well as it does. So here we've got several different levels, and the notation here is that this is the top. This is the top level, but the top level events that lead into the main fault have 1 digit. Then the second level have 2 digits, and the third level has 3 digits associated with it. That's the convention that this particular author used, that I took this from. So the way to begin this process is to write the equations for each fault individually at each level. So at the lowest level, since this is an AND gate, that means that you have to multiply those two lowest level events, right? So, so F311 is the probability of A times the probability of B. Then for 11, 21, 22, and 31, 11 is an OR gate, so that's adding A and B, or B and D. 21 is an OR gate, so you add A and B. 22 is an AND gate, so you multiply B, C, and G. And then 31 is an OR gate, so you add them. And you're understanding that later we can substitute that there. Likewise for F1, F2, and F3. All we do is add or multiply depending on whether it's an AND or OR gate. And then the top level fault is, since it's an OR gate, it's just F1 plus F2 plus F3. Then the next step is to begin substitution. And it's easier to do that from the top level. So if it's F1, F2, and F3, and these are the values of F1, F2, and F3, then by substitution, this is what our equation becomes. Then that's in terms of the second level, and these are the second level values, so we go ahead and substitute. And now the only thing we have left to substitute is the third level, F311, so that this becomes that equation. The point of this is to reduce that equation to the minimum cut sets. And if you run the probabilities, it will come out to a different probability after you reduced it to minimum cut sets, because it changes the probability of the fault because we have excess gates in this, for lack of a better term. It doesn't come out to the same result. And that's typically what happens. So, this resulting equation, you kind of have to rearrange it. Okay, so the first step, I probably should have copied the entire equation, but the first step is to group them. So first of all, AB times B, if we remember anything intersected with itself, or in union with itself, is itself. So that AB becomes just AB. This becomes A times B times D. We have the distributive rule, A times ABCG, and B, since that's redundant, is just BCG. And then G and AB and D and E. And so that's the first step that you would make. Then having done that, and I think that, oh, I did copy it over, I just put some brackets there. Okay, so this is the first step that I just talked about. This is the second step. And these remain the same. Now, this is a bit of an art. We rearranged this according to, in this case, rearrange it according to where G is. G is common to all of those. And here, AB is common to all of those. And here we have D and E kind of hanging out here by itself. So if we can factor G out, anything that includes the universe, 1 is the universe, goes away. So this reduces to G. That's the reason for doing that, because that 1 is the universe. So if we are, and this is a plus, that's a OR, so it's ABC or BC or the universe. It just reduces to the universe, and we have G. It's the same here. We factor A and B out, and if we get the universe in there, this one drops out, so that becomes AB, and we have D and E. That becomes our minimum cut set. Minimum cut set, then, we can draw that, and this is the probability associated with it. And you can see now we just have G or AB or D or E. And AB is F1, which is A and B. So A and B, I'm sorry. And those are all, since these are ORs, plus, that goes into an OR gate, and that's what our fault tree reduces to. With those are our minimum cut sets. Like I said, you will get a failure probability different than that if you go through the pain, which I did one time, of calculating this entire tree. So, like I said, the best approach to take is first substitution, and then you get the final equation. Then with the final equation, it's somewhat of an art to try to rearrange it so that you can group things such that you will end up with a 1. If you can get at least 1, factor it out so that you have at least 1, then you will, then that entire expression drops away. And you can simplify your equation substantially. Make sense? And in doing this, it's a really good idea to go back here and look at these equations, because these equations give you a lot of insight into how to group it, what the rules are, and that sort of thing. So that's this is a synthetic fault tree, but that's reducing a fault tree to its minimum cut sets if you're not sure that they're already minimum. Okay, this is an example from Roland and Moriarty, and this is the one that I thought I had put my extensions on and I haven't, so that's my bad. What I've got here is, you can read this as well as I can, but there's two portions. This switch is closed manually by the human operator. It closes the circuit so that there's power to the upper circuit, because here we've got power supply. And then this timer relay starts to function, okay? And it starts to count down. And it's supposed to, at 90 seconds, shut off. You know, once this is loaded, it's supposed to shut it off after 90 seconds. So power in the upper circuit then activates this relay, which closes the lower circuit. And then the motor runs. At 90 seconds, this opens, shuts off and it opens the contact so that it shuts down the system and stops the motor. Right? So once the human operator activates this circuit, supposedly that person doesn't have to do anything else, because this timer makes the circuit shut itself off automatically after 90 seconds. So there's a number of top-level faults we can look at, but the top-level fault that is of most interest is that this motor here operates longer than 90 seconds. And what we want to try to figure out is what makes that motor operate greater than 90 seconds, what are the faults that can result. And this is kind of non-standard. That's the thing about fault tree. You're probably finding this out when you guys do your research on your topic, is that there are, seems like everybody has their own preferred variants on these things that seem to be at odds with each other in a lot of ways. This is you're not supposed to do this. On most things that I read, yet Roland and Moriarty do this, and they're supposed to be the experts on it, because I took this directly out of theirs. This kind of is the same thing. Motor operates greater than 90 seconds. Well, that means that there has to be power to the motor after 90 seconds. But instead, they say that's two faults. Well, if they want to do that, that's okay. But I think it's kind of redundant to say that. I'd put that on one fault, rather than making it two faults like that. What they've done at the next level is said that this is an AND gate. Okay? Power supply number 2, okay, has to be functional. The fuse has to be closed right here, and the relay number 1 contacts are closed greater than 90 seconds. Okay? This is the one that they have chosen to analyze further, because if you go back and look at our fault tree symbols, past there, that's a normal event. Okay, so we really don't want to analyze it anymore. According to them, in their analysis, they have designated those as normal events. And that makes some sense. That fuse is closed, that's normal, it's always going to be closed. And power supply number 2, that should always be functional. And so we don't want to analyze those anymore. Problem, so what they're doing is they're going through this lower circuit first. These are normal things, that's not. So that's the fault that we're going to, how did that happen?
That was weird.
A couple of years ago, when they first installed these, I don't know if you guys were here, that room and this room were on the same frequency. So you'd be trying to lecture, and it would be flipping back and forth madly until I think they fixed it, but that reminded me, I had a flashback to that, of a ghost in the system. But anyway, so this relay number 1 contacts is closed greater than 90 seconds. This is where I should have my continuation symbol. I didn't stick it in there, okay? That should be there. You remember the continuation triangle? That should be there, but I didn't put it there. So, we have our relay contacts closed greater than 90 seconds. Okay, here we have OR. Okay, a basic event, that relay number 1 contacts fails while it's closed. Now, I suppose you could analyze that further, but they say that that's a basic event, that it can't be analyzed further. I suppose for the purposes of this, that makes sense, unless you wanted to go into, or potentially, into the manufacturing. Okay, but they're making that assumption. Okay, so that's one thing that can cause those contacts to remain closed. The other thing, which they did give further analysis, environmental stresses fail relay 1 contacts closed. Okay, there's something, the relays are okay, but there's something going on around them that makes them fail and closed, closed and keeps the circuit, keeps power to the circuit. This is manufacturing. This is something that's not manufacturing related. I believe that that's the distinction they're trying to make here. But we've chosen not to analyze that. The other option, which is a fault, relay number 1 contacts are closed for greater than 90 seconds. Okay, command closed. In other words, something up here, something in the upper diagram, or the upper circuit isn't working. Okay, so it's not a failure of the relay, either for environmental or manufacturing reasons. It's something up here. That they've chosen to analyze further. Right. Again, they have this power to the relay, which I think is kind of redundant, but once again, we'll just assume that that's okay. And here we have an AND gate. Power supply is functional, which it should be. Spring-loaded switch is closed greater than 90 seconds. I'm not sure that's the way it's supposed to be, but that's what they called it. Okay, so that's a questionable one right there, I think, with that spring-loaded switch. Now the timer contacts are closed greater than 90 seconds. That's the fault that they've chosen to analyze further. I should have another continuation here. So the timer contacts close greater than 90 seconds. Well, that's an OR gate. They fail closed, which they've chosen not to. And once again, this is manufacturing versus environmental. And then the timer contacts command closed. Well, that could be closed because of a failure of the power supply, basic timer function in the relay fails, or the spring-loaded switch is open. Okay. So that means that the switch remains open, and in other words, I find that terminology a bit confusing, because if that's open, it's not going to keep power to it. But I think what they mean by that, and I qualify this every year, is that spring-loaded switch malfunctions, and therefore it maintains power to the circuit. Okay? Why they call it open, I'm not sure, because if it opens, it breaks the power to the circuit. So that means that the spring-loaded switch fails for some unknown reason. That's where they've stopped their analysis, though. Now, there's a couple of things that, like I said, that's one thing that you might notice, is that this terminology is a bit confusing. Also, this is a very deep and narrow analysis. I mean, if you put this all on one page, it's going to be, like I said, very, very narrow and very deep. That's one way to do it, and it's kind of preferable to do that because it's easier, I think, to follow the logic of it. However, it doesn't mean that it's wrong to make it a broader analysis and have one level. There's a number of different ways you can approach it, and there's not one right way to make a fault tree diagram for a system like this. So usually on the exams, for instance, I'll give you a simple system, and I usually get as many different fault trees as there are people in the class, but they're all right. Okay? I can't, occasionally there's some people make some mistakes, but there's a big variety in the way that you can do this and not have it incorrect. So this is just one way to that they've chosen to do an analysis that is very narrow and deep. And like I said, I find that a little easier to follow, but it doesn't make the other ones wrong. Let's see here. Why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then I'll finish up fault tree analysis and move on.